The Man Who Built an Escape Route. Part 1. He who has a why to live can't bear almost anyhow. Friedrich Nietzsche. There was a small village in a country torn apart by war, a relentless battle between a tyrannical government and a powerful extremist group. In this oppressed land lived a father and his young son. It was nearly sunset when the government's military stormed the village, hunting for fugitives who had escaped one of their traps. They banged on every door, methodically searching for any sign of resistance. The fifth house they approached belonged to a kind-hearted couple and their 10-year-old son. Inside, only the husband was present, had just returned home moments ago. His wife and son were still at the family's small store, closing up for the evening at the end of the street. The soldiers searched the house, overturning furniture, scanning every corner. After a few tense minutes, they prepared to leave, but just as they reached the door, the husband saw something that made his heart freeze. His wife and son were walking home. At the far end of the street, more men were arriving, riding powerful horses. The extremists had come. The husband's voice ripped through the air. "Take cover, the extremists are here." But it was too late. Gunfire erupted. His wife and son ducked behind a fence. Eyes shut, praying to be spared. The gunshots roared. When silence finally fell, the boy slowly opened his eyes and turned to his mother. She was bleeding. He gasped, scrambling to his feet. Around him, the government soldiers lay lifeless on the ground. Two extremists remained standing, their weapons still raised, their eyes scanning the aftermath. Somewhere in the chaos, the boy's voice escaped him. "Father." One of the extremists snapped his head in the boy's direction, eyes locking onto him, but instead of approaching, he turned away, following his group as they disappeared into the night. The husband had already broken into a desperate sprint toward them, but as the boy looked down at his mother, he knew she wasn't coming back. "Mother, how?" he whispered. Her gaze softened as she looked at her son one last time. With her final breath, she whispered, "Be brave." Then, her eyes closed forever. She had been shot before she even hit, but she hadn't felt it. All she had cared about was her son's safety. From that day forward, the father and son only had each other in the world. Though his heart ached, the father remained strong for his son. Their love grew even deeper. Every day, the father would teach the boy the wisdom passed down by his own father. The son would carefully write down every thought, every lesson, as if collecting pieces of armor for the future. They would sit together in their small store, discussing the world, its pain, its beauty, its injustices. One day, the father told his son, "We may never understand why bad things happen, why the innocent suffer, why the world is filled with injustice, but we can rebel against it, not with anger, not with hatred, but by being strong, by choosing to do what is right, by helping those in need, by refusing to accept cruelty as normal. Son, we rebel by having strong thoughts, by building an unshakable mind." Part 2. If you are patient in one moment of anger, you will escape 100 days of sorrow. Chinese proverb. 2 years had passed. Life in the village had settled into an uneasy quiet, but the war had not ended. Then, one day, the extremists returned. As was their custom, they were searching for boys strong enough to recruit into their ranks. Unfortunately, one of them remembered something. "I saw a strong boy here 2 years ago," he muttered to the others. "By now, he's probably old enough to join us." They didn't need to search for long. There was only one boy in the village. The others were either too young or already grown men. The group marched toward the small store. When they reached the entrance, one of them spoke, as if making a casual remark about the weather. "Your boy fits our requirements. We're taking him now." The father stepped forward immediately, shielding his son with his body. His voice was steady, but his heart pounded. "No, you are not." One of the men chuckled. "I don't think you're in a position to argue." The father's fist clenched. Desperation surged inside him, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Take everything I own," he pleaded, "but leave my son. I have lost too much, already will not lose him too." The men exchanged amused glances. Then, The one who seemed to be their leader scoffed. "If we wanted anything you own, we would just take it, fool." Turning to two of his men, he ordered, "You lock this man in the back of the store." The father struggled as they grabbed him, his eyes never leaving his son. He held his gaze steady and, with all the strength in his voice, said, "Be brave, I will find you." "Father," the boy cried out, before trying to run, but it was useless. Within moments, they were gone. It took a couple of hours before a neighbor found the man tied and gagged on the back of his store. Enough time had passed. It would be pointless to follow the group. It was a difficult night. The poor man could not sleep. What would happen with his son? How could him rescue him from such a place? As tough as the situation is, I shouldn't lose perspective, the man thought. In the morning, he started to work on a plan. Part 3. Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase. Martin Luther King Jr. The first step was the easiest. He sold the store. It took him a couple of weeks to find a buyer. In a nearby village, an old woman and her husband, former customers, agreed to take it. It was a fair price, but money alone wouldn't be enough for what lay ahead. The next steps were far more complicated. He needed a way out of the country, not just for himself, but for his son. Staying behind after the rescue was not an option. He needed a route, he needed food, he needed horses. Mastering the escape route, the man bought 2 strong horses. Over several months, he took the escape route for times twice with each horse, memorizing every detail. He studied the land under different conditions at sunrise. In the dead of night, under heavy rain, he learned which paths were safest, where to hide, and who to avoid. Along the way, he met others who were fleeing. Some were desperate, some were wounded, some had lost everything. Whenever possible, he helped them. Each journey strengthened his resolve. This was no longer just about escaping. It was about survival. It was about purpose. The secret message. One challenge remained: contacting his son. The extremist camp was heavily guarded, but the man noticed something. A young boy, no older than 8, often wandered freely. One evening, hidden among the trees, he watched as the boy chatted with his son near the campfire. This was his chance. He waited for the right moment, then stepped out just enough to be seen. "Hey, little one," the boy turned, startled. "I need you to deliver something for me," the man said gently, "to the boy you were just speaking with." The child frowned. "Why would I do that?" The man reached into a small bag and pulled out a handful of strawberries, ripe, wet, fresh. "Because I can't enter the camp," he explained, "and I thought you might like to earn these. They were very expensive." The boy's eyes widened. "I ate a strawberry once," he whispered. "It was really good." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but just this once." The deal was made. The boy delivered the note. Then, with a quick glance over his shoulder, he hurried back, snatched the bag of strawberries from the man's hand, and disappeared into the camp. Was a simple code used in his family. The father wrote only, "I'll come for you. Be brave." Those words filled the young boy's heart with hope. Part 4. Man cannot discover new oceans unless he has the courage to lose sight of the shore. André Gide. Another year passed before the plan could be executed. In the meantime, the father worked wherever he could, traveling to distant villages to earn as much money as possible. No task was beneath him, no distance was too far. Every coin mattered. As the final step, he sold his house. He told no one of his plans. In truth, he barely spoke at all since his son was taken. Some believed grief had stolen his will to live. When he sold his house, they assumed he was leaving to escape his past, to forget, to disappear. They were wrong. Waiting in the shadows. For days, the man hid deep in the forest, watching, waiting. He knew his son's routine well. Every week, at dawn, he was sent on patrol outside the camp, a rare moment where he wasn't heavily guarded. 1 week before the escape, the father sent one final message. It was brief, written in their secret code. "Be ready. Next patrol. Do not drink the water." There was no way to explain more, no time for questions. He could only hope his son understood. Preparing the final steps. With only days left, the man made his final preparations. He placed supplies along the escape route: water, food, extra clothing, so they could travel without stopping. He gathered sleeping herbs, carefully mixing them into a strong sedative tea. He memorized every patrol shift, knowing exactly when and where to act. There was no room for error. The escape. That night before, the man watched from the shadows as the patrolmen filled their bottles from the well. He knew they always left their bottles near the gate for the next group to use. That was his chance. When the time was right, he moved silently through the darkness, dressed entirely in black. One mistake, one sound, and it was over. A quick motion, a few drops of the sedative. Then, he disappeared back into the forest. An hour later, the patrolmen never finished their shift. By the time the father reached the gates, they were slumped over, unconscious. His son was already waiting. "Father, are you sure we can escape?" the boy whispered, breathless with fear and hope. The father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son, I have thought of nothing else since the day you were taken." With one last glance at the camp they would never return to, they mounted their horses and vanished into the night. Their journey to freedom had begun. Part 5. It is not length of life, but depth of life. Ralph Waldo Emerson. It took them 3 days to cross the border. In that time, they rested only once. Sleep was a luxury they couldn't afford. Not yet. The supplies were exactly where the father had left them, allowing them to eat, drink, and regain strength. Every hoofbeat on the dirt road was a reminder they were still not safe. Not until they crossed the final stretch of land. A new beginning. At last, they reached the border. For the first time in years, the father felt his chest rise in a breath that wasn't weighed down by fear. He turned to his son. "We made it." The boy said nothing. He just held onto his father tightly. That embrace said everything. A life of purpose. They didn't just leave their old life behind, they built a new one, far from the border, in a city where no one knew their names. New identities, new opportunities, a chance to truly live. But their journey wasn't over, not in spirit. More than once, they helped others escape the way they had. And even beyond that, they helped people in a deeper way, by teaching them what they had always believed, that the greatest freedom isn't crossing a border. It's knowing your mind can never be caged.